In 1824, freed slaves immigrated from the United States to Samana, Dominican Republic. President Voyage of Haiti arranged for African Americans to settle on the island of Hispaniola, with English and Dutch slave surnames like Wilmore, Vanderhorst, Jones, Kelly, Dixon, Anderson, Green, etc. The residents of Samana province in the Dominican Republic take great pride in the fact that a large portion of the populations are descendants of African Americans. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, community leaders such as Bishop Richard Allen, founder of the AME Church, made arrangements for freed slaves, particularly those with shipbuilding skills, to settle in Samana. 47 years later, United States President Ulysses S. Grant had a study made of the Dominican Republic, with particular interest in Samana. Many nations besides the United States have taken interest in the Bay of Samana: Spain, France, England, and Germany. In 1807, plans were drawn for Port Napoleon at the very location of today's city of Samana. Besides establishing a naval base at Samana in order to maintain the Monroe Doctrine, U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant felt that territorial expansion would increase U.S. prestige, furnish natural resources to exploit, and be a location for newly freed slaves to settle. The distinguished African-American Frederick Douglass, 9 scientists, and 10 journalists accompanied the commissioners on their voyage. The commission, its attachés, and the gentlemen of the press numbered 32. The town of Santa Barbara de Samana fills the first level space on the northern shore of Samana Bay.
Santa Barbara is one of the few places in the tropics where the city walls are the great primeval forest. 2 minutes walk from the center of Samana and you are in the dense foliage and undergrowth of the woods apparently never before profaned by human footsteps.
New York Times.
In the village so-called, there appear to be, by my own actual count, 80 buildings, of which 60 are dwellings, the remainder being shops, storehouses and outhouses, church and guardhouse. As to the population, it is estimated at 300.
Springfield Weekly Republican.
In the center of the city is seen the plaza, on which the alcaldes or mayor's office and the Catholic Church are situated with a rough wooden cross in front and a small bell hung on 2 posts outside. And here is a liberty tree planted by the villagers to replace one cut down by the Spaniards who were driven away in 1865. In the background is seen the shell of a church being constructed for the emigrant Methodist congregation with a nearby burying ground.
Frank Leslie's Illustrated Newspaper.
Due to the absence of sawmills, houses in the town were, for the most part, boarded with bamboo split in half and pressed flat. The roofing was of cocoa leaves bound together with vines. There were a few 2-story houses. 2 or 3 houses in the village were roofed with shingles and supplied with all the modern conveniences as plank floors, partitions, and doors and windows. Glass windows were not found.
The American immigrants mostly lived in simple cottages located in cultivated forest openings outside of town. Continual insurrections had made the immigrants victims of pillage, therefore the desire to accumulate goods and build more substantial homes had been crushed. One sign of a desire for refinement was the cultivation of flowers around the cottages.
Dr. W. Newcomb, Commission Naturalist.
Each house had 2 or 3 rooms. The furniture was a few chairs and a table. Instead of beds, hammocks were used. The people generally lived on fruits and vegetables. They bought wheat and flour from abroad. Everybody kept turkeys, ducks, chickens, and other poultry. Those who were not disposed to cultivate enough to eat dug for wild yams in the woods.
The immigrants are honest working people. Most of our people make their living by farming and by trades. Some cut trees and saw boards and hew out frames for house building. The immigrants generally occupy their own land. The farms average about 16 acres. Of those, about 4 or 5 acres are under cultivation, depending on the size of the family.
Reverend Jacob James.
Those of American descent are the foremost men in the settlement, always having to go ahead and are depended on for efficient action. They constitute the most intelligent and well-to-do portion of the inhabitants of the town and peninsula.
Peter van der Horst of Samana.
The whole business of the island was conducted by barter. The store pictured here was one of the largest.
The people in the country bring cocoa nuts, yams, eggs, tobacco, etc. In return, I give them goods, cotton cloth, liquors, canned fruit, codfish, rice, shirts, waistcoats, and sometimes shoes.
J.L. Marciak, store owner.
There is one steamer plying between Santo Domingo, Samana, Puerto Plata, and New York, and a small trade is carried on the vessel bringing clothing, flour, smoked fish, and liquor, and taking back tobacco, hides, dyewoods, and mahogany.
New York Standard newspaper.
There was no recognized currency. The money used was American gold and silver. When the locals obtained any silver or gold, they hid it in the earth or spent it very sparingly. Because of the poor condition of the roads, news reporters noted that they did not see any wheeled vehicles in Samana. The toting that was not done on their heads was left to horses and oxen. Produce could only be disposed of at the waterside to vessels.
A wicker saddle is used on the bulls, to which are attached panniers hanging down on either side, in which is carried merchandise from the town and produce to the market.
New York Times.
In place of a bridle or other headgear to guide the bull, there is a ring in the nose of the animal with a single cord attached to the nose. Literally, these stunted and docile little bulls are led by the nose.
Kalamazoo Gazette newspaper.
Over the 47 years, the immigrants preserved their feelings of being Americans. The immigrants retained all of the habits of neatness peculiar to their counterparts in the United States, some of them in their towering high bandana head and gay-colored striped dresses.
All of the descendants of the American immigrants converse freely in English. You'd be astonished to see them read and write English.
George Louis Judd, schoolmaster.
Geographic features of the Samana Peninsula kept the Samana community culturally isolated from the rest of the Dominican Republic.
The peninsula, as it is called, is really an island. The sea washes over to the gulf between the island and the mainland, and at times the water is deep enough for small vessels to pass through.
New York Herald.
The commissioners and Frederick Douglass were especially struck by the remarkable intelligence and independence of the Negroes of American descent as compared with their brethren of the present day in the United States, the result, doubtless, of their more independent, self-reliant life here.
New York Tribune.
Frederick Douglass was appointed by President Grant to the commission. Because of his influence on Southern blacks, now in a post-slavery era, to immigrate for better opportunities, and to nurture Dominican support for annexation of the Dominican Republic by the United States by, in effect, showing that African Americans and the white Americans were now equal. On the afternoon following their arrival in Samana, Frederick Douglass addressed the community, some 250 people from the town and its outskirts, in the plaza of the town. The older immigrants had vivid memories of slavery in the United States. Douglass described how African Americans had been elevated from wretched slavery to an equality with white men and the right to vote. The African Methodist Episcopal minister who accompanied the 1824 immigrants died within a few months of their arrival. The AME Church was unable to replace the missionary because they were preoccupied with servicing the needs of slaves who were fleeing to Philadelphia from the U.S. South. Eventually, the immigrants directed their appeal for a missionary to the Wesleyan Society in London. In 1856, the Wesleyan Church, St. Peter's, looked like this, with the Wesleyan Chapel on the right, the mission house in the center, and a schoolroom on the hill. The Spaniards burnt the chapel in 1863 and did not permit the Protestants to worship publicly, but they did privately until the Spaniards were driven out. At the time of the Commission's visit, a new church was being constructed to replace the church which was destroyed. Frederick Douglass made a collection from those on the voyage to help in its construction. In the eye of the observers, the women appeared to be far more industrious than the men, and the only persons at work.
Some of them were cooking out of doors beneath a shade made of palm leaves. Others were sewing, others nursing little children. There were women tending store, women washing clothes at the stream, women bringing large bundles of tree branches into the village to feed the horses and cows which were tethered around the houses.
However, it was also noted
Most of the farmers are, however, in the interior, and I have no doubt that they were at work on their little plantations.
New York Times.
the immigrants were very anxious to send their children to school and would make sacrifices to pay tuition and buy books. School books published in Philadelphia were even found in some remote homes. Some scholars had to walk 8 to 12 miles to school. Crime was rare.
Stealing valuable property or robbing does not occur. A person may travel alone and unarmed all over the country with treasure without danger.
The Commission Report.
Mrs. Benjamin Burr, female expatriate living in the countryside, said, "The front door has not had a lock or hook on it since I have been here. In any part of the country in New England, I should not dare to walk alone through the woods at 10 o'clock at night as I have done here." The immigrants suffered greatly from the continual revolutions and insurrections, those of Baez, Cabral, Luperón, and the Spanish reoccupation of 1861 to 1865.
These people are naturally peaceable, but these revolutions have rendered them somewhat turbulent.
Mr. Judd, schoolmaster.
Of course, we fear revolution constantly. The people here are on the constant lookout, occupying themselves in preparing for their defense. And as a matter of course, the industry of the country is neglected. The able-bodied men are always liable to be called out. The whole country is military. Everyone is a soldier. In case of danger here, we fire a cannon of alarm.
Samana's Governor Acosta.
When a revolution takes place, the men follow one leader or the other. The women and the children take to the mountain caves, where they hide until peace comes again.
New York Times.
When the revolutionary leaders take property, they give us some printed slips of paper, which are worthless. Most of my neighbors have lots of it. They take our cattle, our horses, and everything we have, and leave us this stuff for pay.
Report by a local to Frederick Douglass.
The immigrant community were in favor of Grant's plan for annexation to the United States.
The people once thought that whites from the United States would come and make them slaves, especially if they knew of the gold and silver on the island. That has, until lately, been the general feeling among colored people. But now they know the Americans have abolished slavery, and there is no fear of them.
Mr. Judd, schoolmaster.
Annexation was overruled by the United States Senate. With Senate rejection of a coaling and naval station on June 16, 1871, Grant had no alternative or secret funds to pay another year's lease of the bay at a cost of $100,000 per annum. The Stars and Stripes came down at Samana Bay.